Welcome to Alpha Centurion. This is something better title. All right, so let's start off with entertainment. First up is the Doom Patrol Season 2 finale and the first 3 episodes of Season 3. The ending of Doom Patrol Season 2 was unsatisfying and incomplete, but very compelling. Although I was hoping it would have presented a chance for the construct personalities to either enter the real world or interact with the other characters, and that they would be the reason or the way that they would defeat the Candlemaker. And I think Sarah's storyline was the most compelling of Season 2. And it looks like this next season will be absent at least 1 or 2 cast members who may only shoot from remotes. I think that's also the reason why they killed off some of the constructs in Season 2. Then let's get into the episodes. So, episode 1 of Season 3 started out with the closing to Season 2 and the resolution to the character and story arcs from the previous season. Episode 2 was somewhat forgettable, and it was very crass, but it was very funny, yet it did show that the trailer for this season was very misleading. Episode 3 was a solid episode, and the heroes got to reenact their version of the Aeneid or the Odyssey. And they got rid of cast-off characters from the previous season, namely the little girl. Then let's check out Titans, the Land of the Dead theme, as we got to see dead characters come back to life. And my favorite actor and character from the first season, Raven, as portrayed by Tegan Croft, returned. I still hate their portrayal and treatment of Batman on the show, but their pale attempts to be edgy are becoming more forgettable than cringe as the series rolls on. Then let's talk about books, comics, and articles. Today's highlight is going to come from Quillette. This issue for this month was mostly about sexual politics, which is fine by me. And I do recommend reading it. The 2 articles that stood out for me of this issue was Can We Have Sex Back by Alex Degger and The Ironies of Sex by Gregory Gorlick. These were just highlights for me. Then let's talk about YouTube. Trent Horn and countering the word salad objection. One of my problems with Trent Horn is that he takes the conservative view as his default, which added to his profundity can make his arguments dull and dry. But he does a good job in this video, arguing against the word salad objection, or the it's a dodge objection lobbed at Catholics when they engage with atheists and agnostics that are not philosophically inclined. Trent points out that great thinkers such as Einstein and Aquinas argue that serious questions which require great depth of study or research deserve, if not require, complex and long answers. And Trent also lays down the critique that over-reliance on jargon and in-house slang or tribal shorthand does little to move a dialogue forward and will more likely lose your audience rather than convince them of anything. Then let's move on to the channel, the Cordial Catholic, with guest E. Tushnet. They took on the topic of being gay and Catholic. This was a sympathetic and compassionate attempt at outreach to the LGB community. While with some of her more radical stances, Tushnet admits that she is willfully ignoring or defying traditional Catholic teaching, it was a nice change of pace from the Catholic Answers and Ascension Presents attempts, which come off as trite and tone deaf to the current zeitgeist of the culture at large. Her argument seem to be for Catholics to move beyond the negative or prohibitory aspects of the law and customs, and to seek a lifelong partnership with transcendent love, which is beyond the sensual into the platonic or spiritual, as our only love should be God, and therefore loving any fellow Christian is the love of Christ's body. And thus we should seek a celibate, chaste love, not just for homosexuals, but for all Christians, including the heteronormative. As that theme of chaste sacrificial love being the highest form of love in the Bible exists and can be expanded to apply to all believers. Our sixth story of today is that Alyssa Childers, with her guest Mike Winger, also took on the question of, are homosexual behaviors sinful? Mike's answers, as always, were milquetoast and useless. Here's my answer to that question. Any non-reproductive sexual activity that is not open to the possibility of the creation of new life and or that is outside the bounds of a monogamous marriage is considered sinful by common Christian custom. It doesn't matter if it's asexual, heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, or pansexual in nature. And it doesn't matter if the participating party or parties are of any mixture or gender of masculine, feminine, or androgynous traits. It's a sin if it's not open to procreation and if it's not done in the bounds of a responsible, stable, productive, and structured marital unit. This applies for married people and single people. This applies to heterosexual and homosexual as well. Now let's move on to the seventh story of the week, following up on Shu's drama from last week. Stitch and Adam had a dialogue with Big Joel, but the conversation was less than fruitful, as it only served to show that Big Joel could not comprehend how someone could have an honest opinion that was different than his own. Nor was he willing to be sympathetic to a view that disagreed with him, that disagreed with his perspective. Next, let's get to Shabir Ali. On Let the Quran Speak, he asked the question, should Muslims obey non-Islamic law? This is very similar to the James White-Todd Ferail debate that's going on. And that's of the question, should Christians obey an immoral law as well as be submissive to an amoral government? The answer seems to be much the same in either faith. That is, obey God first, but render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, to use Christian wording. And do not worry about it after that. In other words, as long as the law is not asking you to actively go against biblical, or in this case, Quranic morals or mores, then you don't have a theological nor ethical objection to stand on. Then let's get to story number 7. And we're going to be staying on the topic of Islam. King and Generals released 2 great videos recently. The history of Arabia before Islam and how the USSR lost their Afghan war. Both of these are great for coloring in context for our current situation in that region. Let's move on to story 10 and gospel simplicity and his guest, Dr. Amanda Benchkeshan. I don't know how to pronounce that. They took on the topic of how Protestant women throughout history thought of Eve, or their understanding of Eve, and their relation to her, and how she, if at all, reflected on them, and any comment her existence has on women's innate natures. The gist of this video was simple enough. This doctor, Amanda, went to Catholic and Orthodox, that's big C and capital O sources, to get her early commentary. And then she went to one Protestant woman to fill in the rest. But don't let that stop you from listening to this interview. The subject is fascinating. And while I had hoped that she would have added in some powerful women like Saint Teresa of Avila or Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, considering that Beckenhausen is a Protestant and apparently of some type of Reformed Calvinist denomination, I can understand why she didn't. Next, I would like to hit on a video by Emma Angeline. She did a bit on how to read more as a dyslexic adult. Even though this vid is a bit dated, as a fellow dyslexic who likes to read, I thought this video was helpful, if not at least informative. Then for those who aren't interested in Christian issues, I also watched What's the Difference Between Paganism, Wicca, and Witchcraft. I like these kind of broad perspective overviews of beliefs that are different than my own. It widens one's perspective and lets you see how others view you and see where they disagree with you. All right, now let's move on to podcast. And let's talk about Dr. Deborah Soh and the warning against sliding down the slope from polyamory to polyandry to polygamy or polygyny. Both her and Dr. Jordan Peterson, him and his sex and dating apps discussion, on each of their podcasts, respectively, talked about similar and related topics, basically arguing from an evolutionary standpoint that semi-traditional and customary relationship boundaries are good for society and the health of individuals, and that so-called new models of courtship do more harm than good, especially to the uneducated, downtrodden, and working class, which can be bared out through statistical data and analysis, while the elite, well-educated, and wealthy have the luxury to hold and even experiment with these new modes of thinking about sex and gender without having to pay the proportional cost that the less fortunate do when living out these new principles and maxims. The well-off and affluent have the luxury of being allowed to merely play act and pay lip service to these new modes of thinking and norms of social behavior, when statistically they will have a stable, monogamous, homogeneous, equal-classed mate and greater opportunity and ability to absorb a mistake or consequence without it affecting their future potential income, influence, or relationships in an impactful or lasting way. When or while things like abuse, pregnancy, abandonment, loss of opportunity, loss of social status, and even health and legal consequences are more likely for a marginalized person to suffer when they are trying to play the same game by the same rules as the elite. And finally, let's finish off with a letter from a fan. A listener of mine writes in and asks, and this is from Grr Mania. He says, "Oi, Governor, what this about time and the big guy upstairs?" Well, my lad, I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you. The big guy can see all possibilities, including unrealized realities, while we as finite mortals can only exist in actual actualities. And even then, we only have active will in the constant, or that is, the perpetual present. All right, I hope you like this one. That's it for episode 2. If you like anything I said here, please hit that like button and share this video. Please click the links below to support these creators, which I've highlighted here in this video, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. This week's question is, what do you think the permanent title for this show should be? I'll try to add a new question every week, and I'll try to respond to it the following week. Peace.